I was never supposed to hear the words that shattered me. But my mother didn't whisper them quietly or mutter them under her breath. She said them loudly, clearly, with the confidence of someone delivering an announcement instead of an insult. "I wish you hadn't come into this world." Her voice echoed across the lavish dining room. Forks froze midair. Conversations collapsed. Even the soft jazz floating through the speakers died like it didn't want to witness what came next. Dozens of eyes swung toward me, some shocked, some pitying, some anticipating that I'd fall apart right there, like that was the role I was born to play, the quiet daughter, the tolerating daughter, the one who never pushed back. But this time, something unrecognizable rose inside me, a steadiness, a sharpness, a truth I had buried for far too long. I lifted my head, not to beg, not to defend myself, but because her attempt to erase me finally revealed something I should have known years ago. I was never part of their world in the way I believed. I grew up in a 3-bedroom brick house in the suburbs of Rochester. From the outside, it looked perfect. Painted porch rails, trimmed hedges, warm yellow lights glowing behind sheer curtains. People used to describe our home as stable, nice, even ideal. Maybe it was, but not for me. There was a hierarchy in that house, a gravitational pull that every conversation, every decision, every drop of affection gravitated toward. And at the center of it stood my younger sister, Emily. Emily, the miracle child. Emily, the star. Emily, whose presence could transform my mother's exhaustion into delight as fast as flipping a switch. If Emily scraped her knee, my mother would panic like she'd been shot. If Emily wrote a decent paragraph for her school project, my father would beam as if she'd rewritten scientific history. They collected her achievements, big and small, with pride. And me? Whenever I accomplished anything, their reactions softened, faded, and then vanished entirely. I still remember the year I won the State Literature Award at age 15. I was the youngest participant. I'd spent nights writing with cramped fingers and tired eyes, and when I walked home clutching that certificate, my chest buzzed with hope. My mother didn't look up from folding laundry when I placed the award next to her. "That's nice," she said, like I'd told her the weather. Then, brightening instantly, "Emily has a choir solo next week. Isn't that exciting? She's finally getting the recognition she deserves." Recognition she deserved. As if anything I earned was a warm-up act for Emily's spotlight. But I didn't revolt. I didn't complain. I didn't demand fairness. Instead, I worked. I worked early morning shifts at the bakery before school. Not because I wanted pocket money, but because someone had to help cover the bills my parents quietly pushed onto my shoulders. Just until we're more stable, stability never came. Responsibility, however, never left. In college, I juggled classes, tutoring jobs, weekend shifts, and the constant, invisible weight of managing things at home. Not once did my parents ask where the money came from. They simply accepted it, like taking from me was part of the natural order. When I earned a scholarship to Berkeley for my graduate degree, my academic advisor cried harder than both my parents combined. They congratulated me with superficial nods before immediately pivoting to Emily's nursing program, her calling, as they called it. Still, some fragile part of me believed things would be different when I succeeded, that maybe standing on my own 2 feet would finally tilt something in my favor. So after graduation, I moved to Portland for a fresh start. A job in project consulting, a tiny apartment that smelled like new beginnings, and one stubborn hope that maybe my parents would be proud. That hope was the reason I reserved a private dining room at the expensive Riverside Hotel for my graduation celebration. White tablecloths, sparkling glasses, soft golden lamps, the type of place I'd only seen on Instagram. I paid for everything. The room, the food, the wine. Not for luxury, for peace. For a moment where my family and my new life could coexist without tension. My manager and colleagues arrived early. Warm, excited, proud in a way that felt foreign to me. They toasted to my perseverance. They laughed about nights we stayed late at the office. They saw me, really saw me. Then my parents arrived. My mother entered with the cold elegance of someone inspecting a place beneath her standards. My father walked a step behind, uninterested, scanning the room like he regretted coming. They brought nothing. No card, no flowers, not even a simple congratulations. They sat. I smiled. That old instinct of pleasing them flared again, no matter how much it hurt. As introductions circled around the table, people inevitably praised me. "You must be proud of her," one of my professors said to my father with a warm smile. My mother answered before he could. We're proud of both our daughters, she said. Then, with a sugary tone that made my stomach twist. But Emily's work in the hospital, that's real contribution. She's saving lives every day. A few of my coworkers exchanged awkward glances. Another colleague tried shifting the focus back. Your daughter handled some of our toughest clients this year. She's incredible. My father chuckled. As I said, Emily's the real hero. Not everyone can do what she does. And in that moment, the fragile hope I'd been carrying since childhood fractured. When my manager stood to make a heartfelt toast, talking about my leadership, my courage, my potential, I turned toward my parents, waiting, wanting, begging silently for a flicker of pride. Instead, my father whispered something. A final comparison. A dismissal disguised as a sigh. That's when my mother said it. The sentence that exposed everything I'd been afraid to admit. I wish you hadn't come into this world. The room collapsed into silence. Chairs shifted. Someone gasped. And for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain myself. I stood. I straightened my dress, pushed my chair back, and walked away, not because I was weak, but because I was finally done pretending that cruelty was love. The Seattle night swallowed me when I stepped outside. Rain was light, almost teasing, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver and gold. The air smelled clean, wet asphalt and possibility. I let it soak through me, dripping down my coat, down my hair, down the tension that had been building for years. For the first time, I felt untethered. Not free, but unbound from the expectation that my life existed to satisfy someone else's pride. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought the world would cave under the weight of the words. But instead, there was only exhaustion. A quiet, draining fatigue I hadn't realized had been growing inside me since childhood. Birthdays I spent unnoticed, achievements overshadowed, bills quietly shouldered by me. All of it had settled like dust, and now I was brushing it off. The walk back to my apartment was a blur of wet streets and neon reflections. I barely noticed the umbrellas, the late-night diners, the taxis sliding silently along the rain-slick roads. Every step felt like reclaiming territory that had been taken from me long before I had learned the word resentment. By the time I reached my small apartment in Bellevue, my blazer was damp, and my heels had left shallow prints on the tiled floor. I kicked them off, sank to the ground, and stared at the blinking lights of my router. In its steady rhythm, I found a strange kind of comfort. My phone buzzed. 11 missed calls from Mom and Dad. One text. You embarrassed us. Hope you're proud. Proud? Proud of what? Of being invisible all my life until they decided I was too bold to ignore? I opened my banking app. 3 pending transfers. Utilities, Emily's tuition, and part of the family mortgage. My fingers hovered over the confirm buttons. The old me would have pressed yes automatically. Obligations mattered. Duty mattered. Being unseen didn't mean I didn't exist. It meant I obeyed. But not this time. One by one, I hit cancel. 3 confirmations. 3 locks clicking into place. The silence in my apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. Mine for the first time in decades. The next day, Michael arrived. He brought takeout and a bottle of wine, the casual pretense of indifference that betrayed a concern he couldn't hide. Just checking if you're still alive, he said, stepping around the stacks of books and papers littering my apartment. I stayed on the floor, leaning against the couch, my body still vibrating from the previous night's storm. He sat beside me, silent for a moment, letting the warm aroma of the food fill the apartment. Finally, I said it, slowly, clearly, without looking at him. I'm done. He nodded, eyes soft. About time you saved yourself. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no speeches, just acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, something shifted. I realized for the first time that survival didn't mean endurance. It could mean choice. Weeks passed. 3 weeks of complete silence from my parents. No calls, no texts, nothing. And strangely, I didn't miss them. Not the way a daughter is supposed to. I missed the idea of them, the version of family I had been rehearsing in my mind to soothe the ache. But the illusion was gone, and with it came a strange clarity. I threw myself into work. The consulting project I was leading consumed my days, but this time exhaustion felt different. Not the heavy fatigue of invisibility, but the purposeful tiredness of building something that mattered. My ideas, my judgment, my dedication were recognized by clients and colleagues alike. My manager handed me responsibilities, then smiled when I delivered. Finally, the weight of being unseen had lifted. When a local business magazine requested an interview about the project, I agreed. I spoke about resilience, about learning to navigate pressure and neglect, about how determination flourishes when recognition is scarce. I didn't mention my parents. I didn't need to. The words were for me, and for anyone who had ever grown invisible under the eyes of those who were supposed to see them first. Strangers responded. Hundreds of messages poured into my inbox. Stories of parents, teachers, bosses who overlooked potential, words of encouragement from people who had survived similar shadows. I realized then, even if my family hadn't acknowledged me, the world still had room for my presence. But silence in families is never permanent, not for long. One Tuesday, after a 12-hour day that left my heels worn down and my blazer hanging limp from exhaustion, I arrived home to find two familiar silhouettes pressed against the frosted glass of my apartment door. My chest tightened. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a mistake, a delivery or a neighbor. Then I heard my mother's voice. "Claire, open the door, we know you're there." I didn't move immediately. Not because I feared them, not because I owed them urgency, but because the power had shifted. For the first time, I was the observer. They had come seeking something, and I didn't know if I would give it. When I opened the door, they swept in like they owned the space, their presence heavy and entitled. My father sank into the couch with stiff indifference. My mother paced once, then faced me, brittle anger in her posture. "We need to talk," she said. "About Emily?" I asked, voice calm, measured. "Of course it's about Emily," my mother snapped. "Her internship has been cut short. Tuition is overdue. She could be asked to pause her program if it's not resolved immediately. We need your help." I didn't flinch, I didn't blink, I didn't even speak. The audacity landed like a slap. They hadn't apologized. They hadn't asked why I had walked out of the restaurant. They hadn't asked if I was okay. They came to demand my intervention, just as I had predicted for years. When I remained silent, my mother's voice sharpened. "Claire, don't be petty, she's your sister, you owe her." I laughed, short, bitter, controlled. "Away? I've paid her tuition for years. I've covered your bills, the mortgage. I worked myself raw to keep this family afloat. And you? You said I shouldn't exist. You said you wished I had never been born." My father straightened, trying to reclaim authority. "We raised you." "No," I said. My voice was steady, unshakable. "You didn't raise me. You drained me." For the first time, the scales had shifted. I spoke aloud the truth that had festered for decades. The air between us thinned. My mother's eyes widened. My father's jaw clenched. They looked small, like people confronting a force they could not control. I stepped toward the door, not to escape, but to open it wide. I let the hallway light pour into the apartment. "If you came to apologize," I said quietly, "I'll listen. If you came to demand more, I won't respond. The choice is yours." They said nothing. That night ended the way it should have. I was no longer a child bound by the expectation of family loyalty at the expense of self-respect. I had chosen myself. The next morning, the apartment felt different. Quiet, but not lonely. I didn't wake to guilt. I didn't wake to anxiety. I woke to clarity. I could hear my own thoughts again, unclouded by decades of striving for approval that would never come. Work consumed me, and for the first time it was exhilarating instead of draining. The project I led was expanding beyond expectations. Clients deferred to my judgment. Colleagues asked my opinion not because they felt obliged, but because they respected it. For the first time in my life, my voice carried weight, outside the walls of a home that had trained me to be silent. The magazine article I had given the interview to went live, and the responses came flooding in. People shared stories that mirrored my own, of invisible children, of siblings in the spotlight, of parents who measured love by performance or visibility. Their words didn't just validate me, they connected me to a world I hadn't known existed. I wasn't alone. I wasn't broken. I was simply surviving, and now thriving. Yet, as all families do, silence cannot last forever. A week later, they came back. My parents, moving like ghosts into my apartment. My mother's heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor. My father followed, hesitant, like a man unsure of the ground beneath him. "We need to talk," my mother began again. I didn't respond immediately. I was still standing in the center of my living room, tall, steady, breathing deliberately. The old me, the one who would have knelt and begged, was gone. The version of me that had survived invisibility, neglect, and dismissal stood before them now. "This isn't about Emily," I said slowly. "You came because you want something from me. I want you to hear this clearly. I owe you nothing." Her eyes narrowed. My father's lips pressed into a line, but I didn't flinch. "You're our daughter," my mother said, voice rising. "Family is family. You can't just walk away from us." I laughed. Not a bitter laugh this time, but a measured one. "I didn't walk away. I simply stopped carrying the weight you unloaded on me for decades. Family isn't a weapon to wield. I won't be your emotional accountant anymore. I won't fund the illusion of perfection that you demand of Emily at my expense." My mother's hand shook slightly. "You're being unreasonable. You'll regret this. One day, you'll understand." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "That you can diminish a child's existence and expect loyalty in return? That love can be measured in comparison? I understand perfectly." The room was silent, thick with tension. I felt the air shift, not in fear, but in power. I had never spoken so freely, so firmly, so entirely for myself. "You are not the only daughter in this house," my father said, trying to reclaim authority. "No," I said, stepping closer, closing the distance between us without fear. "I am the only daughter I need to be, and that is enough. I've spent years bending to your version of worth. I won't anymore. Consider this a full stop. My responsibility to your illusions ends here." They said nothing. Words had always been their weapon, but now I held the power of silence, and it weighed heavier on them than anything I could have said. I opened the door, wide. The hallway light spilled across the room like truth itself. "If you came to apologize, I'll listen. If you came to demand more, leave." My mother's mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for leverage. There was none. My father's jaw clenched, realizing the ground had shifted permanently beneath them. Finally, they left. The click of the door echoed like a liberation bell. I stood there listening to the silence, not empty, not oppressive. Mine. Days turned into weeks, and the familiar ache of guilt never returned. Work, relationships, and personal growth filled the space once occupied by fear and obligation. I led my team through the completion of our project with confidence, earning not just accolades but trust and respect. For the first time, I wasn't striving for validation. I was simply performing at my potential. The messages from strangers continued. Each one was a story, a reminder, a breadcrumb leading me toward something bigger than family-defined worth. People who had spent years invisible now reached out to me, thanking me for speaking truths they themselves had buried. The impact of my work, both professional and emotional, finally reflected the contributions I had always made quietly, unacknowledged. One night, I stood on the balcony. Seattle's skyline stretched below me in a soft, misty glow. I held a glass of water in my hand, letting the coolness seep into my fingers. The city hummed softly, distant traffic and flickering neon lights forming a pulse that matched my own steady heartbeat. I thought of the girl who had spent years trying to earn love from people who would never give it freely. She was gone now. In her place stood someone quieter, stronger, and undeniably whole. I realized that independence wasn't about cutting ties for vengeance. It wasn't about anger. It was about recognition. Recognition of my own worth. Recognition of the life I had built. Recognition that love could be found outside the narrow definitions I had been handed. No apologies came. No phone calls. No last-minute attempts at reconciliation. And I didn't want them. What mattered was not their acknowledgement. It was my own. My life was mine to shape. My choices mine to make. That season of severing ties left a mark, not of emptiness, but of freedom. I could breathe, create, love, and succeed, without the constant weighing of others' approval. I could nurture relationships that were mutual, invest in myself fully, and step into my power without hesitation. On the balcony, watching the rain-slicked streets glimmer beneath the city lights, I understood the depth of my journey. I had survived neglect. I had survived comparison. I had survived the silent, subtle erosion of a childhood spent chasing shadows. And now, I thrived. Not in spite of them, but because I finally chose me. I raised my glass to the night, to the rain, to the journey, to the girl who had endured so much, and to the woman who finally emerged whole. I whispered it quietly to myself, a mantra, a declaration. I am seen, I am worthy, I am enough. And for the first time, truly, completely, I believed it.